But I am so hyped because part of what makes this book so exciting for me, I think this is like, I was thinking about this earlier. This is like the penultimate almost of most of the things that we've been discussing, right? Like we've been discussing theater, we've been discussing rhythm, right? In books, we've been discussing poetry, we've been doing stanzas, we've been doing short stories, we've been doing science fiction. And all of these things come together in this form of music, right? With someone, a woman who's a mother, naming all of those divine elements that she's able to give to her son. So I was really excited because I made those threads. Maybe you think I'm dragging it, but maybe hopefully the more we go into it, you'll see, oh, Paula, that makes sense. So let's start. I want to take a moment and see if there's anything that stood out to anyone that's like, Paula, I want to name this right now before we even dig into whatever you want to share. Any piece, any element that stood out. Great. So this was something that we all felt familiar with. There was nothing, you know, I feel like usually sometimes when we enter a space as books, maybe I'm wrong, but, you know, particularly our last book together was Olio, I believe. And there were so many things that we don't read traditional books. And I feel like, although this is a poetry anthology, it comes off more as a prose, as a story, a linear line. How do folks feel about that? Yeah? Great.
I think it's interesting how fluid she is with going between prose and poetry. Sometimes, I mean, when I heard about the book, I thought there would be these sort of hard breaks between her telling her story about her son and their relationship, the whole family's relationship, and the inclusion of poetry, but it's actually just fluid. It's like, you know, a chapter is poetry, then a chapter is prose. And then there are images of these letters that Malik wrote to his mother or vice versa, which also flow evenly throughout at least the first part of the book that we read, which is pretty interesting. Just like as an exercise.
I agree. I feel like, I think naming sometimes when you see those pieces, you try to embrace the story sporadically. And this was not, I felt like I was reading the beginnings of their life, you know, and toward,
right.
Did folks, you know, let's share, let's see, did folks get to page 72? Cool. And if some folks didn't, that's fine, but were we able to get into it? I would love to take a moment before we even start to talk about the book to say that I saw an interview where she was naming that Cheryl's mother is also a poet. So Fife was able to grow up with his grandmother writing poetry with him and his mother. And I wonder, what does that say to, how do y'all feel about legacy in relationship to that, right? Like taking that skill. What does that mean to folks? Particularly those of us that, you know, I'm not a mother. I'm just gonna.
Cheryl's mother didn't write poetry, but she grew up in Trinidad and in the Caribbean school system. There's a love of poetry that is passed on to the students. And at certain ages, they have to get up and recite poems. And the love of poetry is so ingrained in them that even as adults, they can still recite the poems that they recited in school when they were kids. And so her mother was always introducing both Cheryl and Malik, and Cheryl has a brother, by the way, to poetry, exposing them to the poetry that she learned in school.
Mm-hmm. You know, that's an interesting distinction, EJ, that I just want to name for us as a group, because I called her a poet and you said, well, she wasn't a poet, but she was very much into it. Right. But also naming that poetry is not only the creation of what we make ourselves, it is that ability to recite and tell. Like, one can be a poet in those ways. And I think being a poet in that way lends to Fife's own musical ability. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if the poetry is just the writing. How do folks feel about that? Especially in Black Caribbean culture where, you know, we don't write everything down. The origins of that aren't always written. We're very verbal as well. The passing of stories and all those things. What do folks think about that distinction? Would we be able to call grandma a poet? Maybe not. I'm curious.
Well, I was going to say that, you know, some people, I've introduced myself before, but my mother was Puerto Rican. My father was Jewish. And in my mother's family, it's very similar what EJ was saying about in Trinidad. Growing up, my family in Puerto Rico also had a love of poetry. And that came from the school system too. And they were reciters. They weren't writers of poetry. They were reciters. And people at parties would get up and recite poems that they had also learned when they were young. So it is interesting you're saying I guess it's a Caribbean thing overall. And it's very beautiful to like, because people like love it. And so when they're reading the poems that they've learned, they do it with such passion, and it really organizes a community of poets, a community of poetry. That was my experience growing up.
Any other thoughts, folks? Is grandma considered a poet here? Would we say maybe not, but she does get the credit for the love? What do we think?
I give her the credit for the love.
I like that.
She loved poetry, and she
like
loved the fact that Cheryl wrote poetry, that Malik wrote, you know, his type of poetry. You know, she didn't discourage them from doing that. You know, in other cultures outside of the United States, you know, being a writer, being a poet, it means something to the community. It's, you know, it's just as honored as if you are a doctor or a lawyer, or, you know.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, y'all, for sharing and talking about that Caribbean connection. I think it's also really important.
I know that actually one of our members, book club members, Pamela Sporn, she created a short film called, I think it's called The Cigar Maker, where in Cuba, in the cigar factories, there is one person whose only job is to read. And that person will read to the entire factory. It could be the news, it could be poetry, you know, it could be some kind of prose in the form of like reading from a book of fiction. So that does seem to be like throughout the Caribbean, and it's probably African tradition of, you know, passing down stories, the verbal or the oral tradition of, you know, just speaking to people as opposed to everything coming out of a book, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, you know, all right, you can get comfy. When we look into the introduction, right, in between pages 1 and 2, she actually, to that point, Ron, she delves into this idea of, because of whatever cultural ties, I always wanted to ensure that my son was able to express himself fully in a full-formed way, not only in writing, but in speaking and talking. Did folks get a chance to read the intro? If not, we could take a moment to read it now, right? We got a whole hour. Is there anything else that stood out to folks in this intro? I also thought the story about the ice cream trucks was cute. You know,
No, but I think y'all could read the intro, because I waited till last minute to get the book. I thought it would be on Audible like all the other books were, but it wasn't. So I'm still waiting for mine in the mail. So I would love to hear the introduction.
Let's go. Barbara and EJ, do y'all have the book in front of you?
Yeah.
Would y'all be able to, Barbara, if you could hit us with the first page, EJ, if you could hit us with the second page all the way into the paragraph additionally, that'd be great. And you can pick it up in the last sentence. Thank you.
Okay.
You're calling out folks like it's, oh no, I'm sorry. If you don't want to read, you don't have to. Y'all are the first two that came up on my screen.
I'm happy to read the first paragraph if you guys can hear me, because it's kind of loud back here, but I can kind of do the first one if you want.
Yep, and I'll take up the second, and either you can finish us off.
Okay.
Okay.
I hid my pregnancy. We're doing the intro, right, you said?
Yes.
I hid my pregnancy from my mother, but sneaky detective that she was found out anyway. Mom had been snooping in my things when she found the baby pills, aka prenatal vitamins. She was the type of mother who knew better than you when to expect your monthly. She knew if your period was late, if your heart was hurting, what boy was calling you on the downstairs telephone. I called her the pussy police. My mother knew all these intimate things about me, but was not able to speak to me about menstruation, sex, or birth control. So it's not surprising that I was not able to tell her that I was pregnant, despite the fact that I was engaged to my son's dad, and that my family and I were making wedding plans.
Walt and I got married in July. Malik and his twin brother Mikal were born 2 months premature in November 1970, but only Malik survived. Walt and I are from Trinidad and became parents at 19 and 21. We had no clue about parenting. We were raised by the children are seen and not heard generation. Coming from Caribbean parents, we always joked that they were missing the nurturing gene. They were stern and had inherited an abundance of punitive gene. So when our sons were born, we agreed to communicate openly with them and let them speak as much as they wanted to. In our home, Malik could discuss almost everything. He could not be rude or nasty, but he could share his thoughts and ideas freely. I'd observed that many Black men were not given the opportunity to express themselves freely in the US, and I did not want that for my child. We allowed him the freedom to think and dream, to fantasize and plan. I always taught my son to be a doer and not a talker. So when he announced that he was going to be a rapper, I could only support him.
As a young child, when looking at television together, our son would look at the toys on TV with stars in his eyes and say, "I'm getting that." Most children would probably say, "Mom, can you buy me that toy?" With him, it was, "I'm getting that." He was a forceful child and knew at a very early age what he wanted for his future. Surprisingly, he had very good ideas and we never stopped his dream. Once when Malik was 4, his grandmother left 35 cents for him to buy ice cream. When the ice cream truck rolled around, he was already in bed. Knowing how much he liked the music, I called him out of bed to see the truck. He wanted to go out and get some ice cream, but it was already late and past his bedtime. When the truck left, he stomped into his room angry. I called out to him, asking for my goodnight hug. He did not answer. I called him again. Still no answer. Finally, I said sternly, "Get in here. Did you hear mommy saying goodnight to you?" He said, "Yes, but I don't speak to people who don't stop ice cream trucks. My grandmother left money for my ice cream, and you let the truck go." I was stunned. There was no way to make it right, so I just hugged him and sent him to bed. In nursery school, Malik memorized every line of the play Mother Goose. He was able to prompt all the children who had forgotten their lines on the day of the show. In his 3rd grade yearbook, he said he wanted to be an actor. It was in his blood, so we encouraged him to work hard and follow his art. Fife, the artist, has so many fans around the world, but I share this story to give you a glimpse of Malik, the son, husband, diabetic, and dad. I share our story in hopes that it may inspire you to keep healing, growing, and moving forward, even after you've been through the worst news of your life. It will take a lifetime for me to get over losing him, but I want you to learn from my story. When you've been given a life-threatening illness, you don't have to curl up and die. You can rise above the challenges and keep moving. As Tribe said, push it along, push it along. Additionally, I wrote this book for Deisha, Malik's wife, and David, his stepson. Mostly though, this is for Malik, For years, I watched him struggle with the affliction of diabetes. There was a period when he would dialyze 4 times each day while on tour with A Tribe Called Quest. Sometimes he seemed too weak to perform, but he showed up. And when he hit that stage, he killed it. Watching his performances remain some of my proudest moments as his mother. I have learned courage, strength, determination, and love from Malik. This is my story of faith and perseverance.
Well, I just want to, I'm going to clap because I love a read aloud. Thank you so much. So now that we've read it and we've heard it, are there any sentiments or feelings that maybe you've had that before? You're like, I actually know what that is. I have a relationship to someone that's gone through that. Maybe it's something like the ice cream truck story, right? Is there anything that stands out to folks?
Well, the thing I always found interesting about the relationship of Malik and Cheryl as Malik, the young child, is that she was always very much in tune to what he thought his calling was. And she supported that. She never tries to make him be what she wanted him to be. She let him follow his own dream, whatever that dream was.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of parents don't do that. They have in their head what their children are supposed to be, and they don't want to hear nothing different.
Particularly in that culture that she's naming. Has anyone else in our space, you don't have to tell me a family trauma, but is there anyone else in the space that kind of can relate? Maybe it's just a nod or a yes, but you can relate to that understanding of expectations, of familial expectations. I hear her story and I think about my mom, who my grandmother had a lot of unrealistic expectations, and thinking about what you just said, EJ, and that it seems like Cheryl's able to, and not really have the expectations of her son of this is what he has to do, just support the hopes and dreams that he's able to do it his best. You know what I mean?
Right.
That made me really emotional, the intro, because I immediately thought about like my family services. Debbie, thank you for agreeing or just thumbing up it. Thumbing it up? I don't know what the grammar is on that. But thank you for agreeing and naming that. Yeah, like, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was just a thumbs up, sorry.
Oh.
The thing that I can think about is, yeah, I kind of grew up with family expectations, especially coming from being a first generation American from Dominican family, very conservative and how a lady's supposed to act. And when those expectations aren't met, it's kind of like seen as a disappointment or frowned upon.
Absolutely. So I just want to make the connection. So then when reading this, how did that show up for you when you're kind of going through that?
Kind of relatable.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I love most, I think, about being able to dive into this memoir, because it's in verse, right? And I don't feel, I think we've spoken about it in the past, sort of like, what are these multiple identities that we're in, right? I've named this with y'all, and like what feelings belong to us versus what the author's trying to feel. But I very much am pulled into this one emotionally, and it may be just because I have a mother, and I have a relationship with my mother and able to sort of feel those sentiments. And it made me think, Lord, if my mother had to write a book about me, if I ever had to pass before her, I don't want anyone to read it. Like, just honor her, make her feel good, but don't read it, because
You know what's also interesting, and I'm not speaking specifically about Cheryl, but you guys just sort of touched on it a bit, the whole idea of the freedom and expectation of children in Caribbean households. That the mere fact that as a child, you would go to your Caribbean mom and say, you know, I want to rap, as opposed to, you know, I'm gonna get a job working for transit that has good benefits and retire in 20, 30 years. That latter is more the norm. So to have a mom who would say to a child, you know, explore and pursue your creativity in any way you see fit, is really amazing to me, because I also grew up in a Caribbean household. And just like now, thinking of telling my mother, like, I would want to rap, and her taking that seriously, it seems like, you know, I would have been speaking a completely foreign language to her. You know, I remember when I told my parents I was leaving a job I was at for 10 years to open a bookstore, and you would have thought I said, I'm leaving my job to go and rob people all day. You know, there was no like correlation between doing something creative and sustaining and having the ability to sustain yourself. You know, there's just, the two don't like jive. And I was a grown man when I told them this, and they were still like, you know, are you crazy?
Right.
So,
And when you think of generation and access in Caribbean culture,
yeah.
all I know is that everyone comes here so that I could go to school, so that my brother could go to school. So everything is so that we can go to school. So the idea that his mom was able to still value a sense of education and his creativity and not force that, because maybe it wouldn't have been the transit thing. Maybe it could have been like, no, you're going to school. And that's usually what I feel like Caribbean parents do. It's like, yo, you got to go to school. I don't know what you're talking about. So I too was kind of shocked at how open, even in the beginning, how just open her love was, you know, and I felt it in the intro.
I think it was okay for him. I read it. He could think, dream, fantasize, and plan, and he fought to be a doer instead of just talking about it. He wanted to do it. And then he had a lot of good ideals as well, and he never stopped dreaming at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, his mom supported him when he said, hey, I want to be a rapper.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I want to take that idea of the way she holds him is what I hear you saying, right? The way she holds him, and naming that. Once we go past the introduction and we actually get into the book, she names this first part, "The Summer Fife Was Born." And what stood out to me immediately was that she then starts it with his death. Yeah. And, you know, Jessica, would you like us to read it aloud?
Yes.
Period. I know.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone would like to, if you have the copy in front of you, we'd love to hear some voices. You don't got to sing as good as me to read this poem. Anyone want to jump in?
Wait, just read When Her Child Dies.
Yes, just the full poem though. It's on 7.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. When her child dies, for Malik, a mother does not know her heart will leap out of her chest. With such force, it will cause a rebellion. She does not know that her hands will be numb for weeks. She does not know her sugar will rise, even though she has not eaten in 2 days. She will come to distrust her universe. Her black-eyed Susans, her sweet Williams, the soil she loves to squish her toes in, sun hugging her aching shoulders, moon scurrying across her worn windowsill. She will mistrust them all. When her child dies, friends will come daily with milk, honey, cheese, red wine, spelt bread, and ginger jam. She will not remember their touch. Only their eyes glossed over with tears. She does not know. She will stop speaking to his father and threaten to sue him. Her hair will fall out in clumps. She will lose big spaces of memory. When her child dies, a woman will fight for her sanity. She will travel to Anguilla and beg Yamaya to bring him back. As the ocean swells, she will listen for his laughter. She will press her face in the damp earth, call his name, Malik, 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 Isaac.
I was clapping on mute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. When her child dies, What's standing out to folks here? Jessica liked it. Debbie liked it. Folks are liking it. No, just going by reactions. What's standing out here? You know, with such force, it'll cause a rebellion. And I'm interested in particularly to hear maybe if you've lost someone before, you know, what does that feel? And if you haven't, if you're in a position where you're able to mother someone, what does this poem feel like for you?
I haven't, thankfully, lost a child, but I do have 2 children. I have a friend that has lost a child, and he was, I guess, like in his 20s. And the first time I met her, she was always like, she was such a happy person, but I always would say to her, she has sad eyes. And a couple of words that she uses in these sentences, she describes as that. She says she's numb. She says always that her pain is never going to go away. Like that pain will always be with her forever. And even though she has other children, other grown children, she says that she will never feel the same because of the loss of her child. And she always says, like a lot of other moms that have lost their children, that moms shouldn't, or parents shouldn't go before their children.
Right. How many of us have heard that before? I've definitely heard that. Yeah.
So, you know, and I always think about that, because no matter how much you say, or how much medication you take, or how much therapy you go to, I don't think that will ever help a person. But I believe that maybe Cheryl writing this book may have helped her get through whatever it is that she's feeling.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We also got to remember that this is her second child. So Malik was a twin, and the twin died at birth. So this is the second child she's lost.
I was also really impacted when she writes about traveling back home and begging Yamaya to bring him back, right? Just that state of what she names very, very elegantly and softly are just the stages of grief that we experience, right? The denial and the anger. And she was incredibly open in that way. You know, threatening to sue his father. I was like, oh, she's giving it to, okay, we're diving right in. We diving right in. Yeah, I really appreciated it, you know.
But that part where she says she's gonna sue the father, it wasn't clear, are they breaking up? Is she blaming the father?
No.
Separated already.
And
Yeah, they're divorced. They've been divorced for years.
Yeah.
We have to, in context for the book, you have to also keep in mind that while she's talking about Malik, her son, there's also Fife. And as an entertainer who passed, there are certain things that happen when you pass, royalties and all this other kind of stuff that goes on. And so you have this business aspect of this person, of your son. It's not just your son that you raised, it's also the entertainer he became.
Yeah.
So when she makes references like that, it's the more along the lines of the business of Fife, not so much Malik.
Yeah. And to delve into that, AJ, I think we can name that she comes across as naming like the business itself is not even the issue. Is that I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this man in this way. I need my son to be here. I need you to be here. This is not something that I ever wanted to have to do. And now this is on me, and I'm at the point where I'm suing him. You know what I mean? Like it's I feel like she's expressing a rage or anger a little bit more self-reflective than toward him, right? I didn't feel like she was coming for him. I think it was more checking herself, like, wow, I'm in this shit with this man that now I'm suing him, and I'm over here trying to grieve you. And
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Look at me, I'm talking like I've never been married, don't have children, like I'm ready to go. I'm like, okay.
While Cheryl has written this book, because she wrote the book because she wanted people to know her son outside of his personality, the personality that he had become, the superstar that he had become. And, just as much as she was hurting about it, his father was hurting about it, his wife was hurting about it, so it's all of that actually, I think, works into this book.
Absolutely. With that, let's go a little deeper into the book. We see our next poem, Yellow Sour Grass, which is it's pretty self-explanatory, just that small snippet of grief. I believe it's the grass near the funeral that she's naming, right? Like near the plot, near the ground, perhaps near the grave. And then the next page, we see a small note that it's typed into the book itself. What's beautiful about this book is that there are also, we'll see as we continue, handwritten notes from Fife and from Mama Cheryl, yeah? And we get to see their handwriting. But right here, it's just a small type note from 1981 that reads, "Dear Mom, today I made up 15 good songs." And then he signs it Malik Taylor, 1981, age 10. And I just thought that was a beautiful little touch, right? Just to name, we really see how far back it goes. It's not just a mother giving her son praise after his death. It's literally showing us she has been in his vision and in his dreams for a long, long time. I'm gonna keep going into the next poem, and if anyone wants to stop and say something, you can, but obviously I'm trying to get somewhere. The Summer of Fife Was Born is next, where that to me comes off more prose. I don't know how folks felt about that poem specifically, but The Summer of Fife Was Born seems like a prose story. It doesn't necessarily seem like, not that it doesn't seem like a poem. We've already covered that. We know anything could be a poem. But unlike the other poems, like we started with these couplets and now she's moved into prose. So I enjoyed that. And in that, if you move on to page, actually before we move on, she ends it naming that he was born during the summer where he was 10 years old, right? Jessica, I'm gonna read it for you. I'm gonna go through it. The summer Fife was born. The year Malik was 7, I was a theater, hold on, gotta stop this. Y'all know I was so happy when I found out she was a theater major. I know you thought of me. You were like, oh, Paula's excited. It made me feel great. Okay, here we go. The year Malik was 7, I was a theater major at York College in Queens. When I could not afford a babysitter, I took him with me to class, poetry readings, and rehearsals. He would sit quietly and watch us rehearse, but mostly he would run around and play at the back of the theater. It was there where he met Imani, the little girl who was his best friend until the day he died. After playing for hours, I would ask him to settle down and write a poem, which he did cheerfully. His first poem was about being in the park after dark. A bit scary, but he had spent many hours at the park with his dad playing soccer, often into the late evening. As a teenager, he told me he thoroughly enjoyed expressing himself on paper and that it helped him to understand his questions more clearly. I felt overjoyed because I was raising a Black man in troubled America who was seeking answers for some of his issues and questions. The summer Malik was 10, we were making plans to send him to the YMCA summer camp in Jamaica, Queens. Again, when he told me how he hated that camp and he did not want to go anymore. He had spent 3 previous summers there and seemed to really like it. I wanted to know why he didn't want to go anymore. He told me that children fought and cussed a lot and that he'd rather stay home with his grandmother. She was a lot of fun. They did things together like visit family, shop for fruit, study his Bible lessons, and cook. They even went to vacation Bible school together. I knew lots of playtime was secretly woven into that righteous listing. So I made him a scrapbook and asked him to record his thoughts and send me a note every day telling me how he was and what he was doing. The first note went something like, Malik played in the hot sun today, scrimmage and baseball. Then he rested with a cool piece of watermelon. Grandma got stung by a bee, and Malik did too. That was the beginning of a series of letters, journals, entries, poems, and songs he wrote to his dad and me that year. I will always believe that Fife was born that summer. What is she saying here? Why do we even need to know that?
Once a writer, always a writer.
What you mean, EJ? What does that mean?
He loved it, you know, really, he loved to write. So he loved doing those journal entries and things. And he just never stopped. That was his first love, the words on the page. He never stopped loving that.
But I'm curious to know what happened. Sorry, my apologies. In 1981 to have made him write 15 good songs. What transpired then? And there's talk about like him being with his grandmother, and I wonder how that impacted his writing.
And those songs, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that he just mentions that he wrote 10 good songs in the letter. I don't know, like he was documenting what he did that day. I don't know if those were like his first 10 songs. I just think how I read it was like he was just sort of detailing what he did, you know, that week or whatever the time period was. And maybe that's when Cheryl kind of acknowledged in her mind that if Malik is writing to this extent, there is a possibility that he can be a poet. And I'm sure Cheryl at 10, Cheryl probably saw him more potentially being a poet as opposed to a rapper. I can't speak for Cheryl. I don't know what she thought, but you know, at that age, you don't think of a kid rapping, although you don't think of kids being poets, but considering Cheryl's background, maybe she leaned more towards the idea of this is a literary artist.
Yeah. Well, I want to name Martha's connection really quickly though, before we move on, because I also, to that point, I hear Martha saying, Martha, tell me if this is wrong. Because what I think I'm understanding is that, first of all, she does say that there are songs, right? So she does say that they get sent songs, but also I think the curiosity is maybe not what's the specific incident, but clearly there's an impact awakening in this child, right? That this child is getting up. You know what it is to bust 15 songs, even 15? If I did an exercise with all of us right now, and EJ is a poet, we're not gonna be able to bust 15 poems out of it. You know what I mean? Like that's an entire, so I think what we can see is that whatever was happening that summer, the surroundings led to this vibration in this child that they were like, oh, I'm right. The surroundings led to this movement, this impact, this vibration that even if it wasn't, maybe it was his third set of 15 songs, but clearly he was moving, becoming his artist self at 10, which is,
okay. I think the answer is on page 13. It's the end of the mom's letter to Malik.
Read it to us, EJ.
It says, letters, poems, and lyrics arrived that summer. Then rappers delight, Run DMC and LL Cool J swarmed our living room. Rap and hip hop became staples of Malik's life. It was not long before he learned the pleasure of words spoken with music. Our home was a haven for political music and poems. We listened to Gil Scott-Heron, Amira Baraka, The Last Poets, Dick Gregory, Angela Davis, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez, The Mighty Sparrow, Lord Kitchener, most of all, Bob Marley. When Malik was 8, my mother spent 6 weeks helping him memorize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. I Have a Dream speech for a church cotillion. He did really well and received lots of encouragement and praise. A light switch went on. He carried it throughout his life.
Right. So that connection of culture and just the culture within his home, his exercise between his mom and his grandmothers, and then the outer Black culture that is bursting at the 70s, particularly in 70s and 80s, particularly in New York. Again, look at me talking like I was there, but you understand what I'm trying to say, right? And we're naming that sort of all these, Martha, thank you, because I think I kind of skipped over that as I was reading, but we have to name that she's also archiving like a huge moment in culture, you know, like her son kind of felt the vibration and the impact of all that. And that's how Fife was born.
And another thing, I don't know if it makes a difference, but that him and his grandmother got stung by a bee. And then after that, that was the beginning of a series of letters, journal entries, poems, and songs he wrote to his dad and his mom that year. So
just like having experiences, is that what you mean? Yeah, just like,
right. And then that happened, and then he's starting to do all these things, start writing.
yes, absolutely. It's around that age too, for those of us that have been near 10-year-olds in whatever proximity. It's around that age, 8, 9, 10, where those sort of outer experiences kind of lend to how they navigate the world, you know? You get stung by a bee, you're more careful. It's little things like that that really lead to child development. So I love that. Anais, I love you. I'll see you later. Okay.
He also makes a distinction also, like to Ron's point. He says, Ron was like, oh, you know, we don't know if that's when he first wrote songs, but we can say that this is when he wrote good songs.
Yep.
Right? Because he was like, you know, I made up. And I like that. He didn't say, right, I made up. Right?
Absolutely.
15 good songs, not like, you know, he might have been writing for, like you said, 8, 9, 2 years prior to that. But this is when he felt like he had something. And then EJ, when you're saying about how his mother was like, after he performed that I Have a Dream, that's when Fife was born. That as a performer, I'm thinking it's that moment when the audience responds to you and you're like, yes, I got this. This is good. I can do this.
Yeah.
You know, it gives you that energy to keep doing it. So I'm wondering if that's what happened to Fife in that moment.
You're right, Marta, because it says a light switch went on. He carried it throughout his life.
Yeah, that feeling, that indescribable feeling, like someone's responding to me. And again, shout out to Grandma, because as much as he was made to write and move, it was maybe Grandma's love of performance or reciting. We don't, again, being able to help lend those two things led to a legend, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I had the patience to teach an 8-year-old to memorize the I Have a Dream speech.
Listen, that's why we love our teachers here at One Book, One Bronx. We love our Department of Education, DOE teachers, charter school ones too, but hey, shout out to public school, okay? We're teaching these kids a lot, okay? Let them know. Anything else? Anything else happening? On page 12, we see Malik's, you know, mom wrote him a letter and she's kind of like, yo, I know I'm nagging you and stuff. How do we feel about that little clip? It's the letter. I don't know, but if you can't read that text, there's something on the bottom. Ron, you want to read that for us, dear Malik?
I don't have the book.
Oh.
Sorry.
Anyone else?
I will.
Yes.
Is it, Dear Malik, you may not realize it now?
Yes.
Dear Malik, you may not realize it now, and I know you think I am a mean old mother, but one day you'll realize that all my fussing, yelling, and spankings were just as painful for me as it is for you. I want you to be a success in everything you do. That's why all the nagging. So write me a letter each day telling me all of your activities and how you're getting along. It will help you to express real feelings and make you a better writer. Love, Mom.
Thank you. I want to name this. She talks about like him getting hit or whatever it is. And then or beatings, as she named it. And then in the same moment, she's expressing, I want you to be able to communicate your thoughts, right? I think that was a powerful motherhood moment. How are folks feeling about that? Take a moment to read it again. How are folks feeling?
That's that mother's guilt.
Talk about it. What do you mean?
So, as a mom, like this, I disconnected with me because I'm that mom that's like, if you could see my hand right now, I'm just like,
it's like
slamming it against my, exactly,
Yeah.
Right, no, slamming it against my hand, like I'm just like strict, right?
Yeah.
So exactly,
I practice this often. No, let me stop.
Right. And then, but in the same token, you're like, I love you. It's just I want you to do better. I love you. I want you to be good. And it's a thin line between abuse and love, even though there shouldn't be, but sometimes there is. And I see that here, where she's like, I fucked your ass up. However,
I don't want to.
I love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And I want you to be able to express yourself to me.
Right. Which, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that you brought up that thin line.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just felt like guilt.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna give you props over here. Thank you for sharing that. That's very real. Jessica, what's up? What were you gonna say?
I had a conversation recently with my daughter's father about this, like hitting your kids. I was never hit. And he said something that as soon as she said, I want you to be able to communicate, when you read that part, that conversation came back to me because he said, I never had to hit my sons, because he has two sons, older sons. He's like, I never had to hit my sons. He's like, and then he said, because when you hit them, it shows you don't have patience and you don't know how to communicate your thoughts to them, or something along the lines of you're not communicating effectively, and that's why you use hitting as your form of communication to get through to them. And it kind of just, it brought me back to that moment. And for me, like I said, I was never hit. I don't judge. My sisters were. I know a lot of people that do and don't, to each his own. But and everyone's telling me, oh, yeah, it just happens. But I kind of did. I felt that when he said that about communication and patience, and that's why that thin line is so real.
Yeah. Thank you so much for expressing your truth too, in relationship to your family. Yeah, and I think it's one of these rare moments that we don't get to see or understand in motherhood, particularly in like older Black mothers. We don't get to see that sense, at least in a media portrayal, we don't get to see that sense of there are moments where I'm conflicted, but I'm giving you my best. A lot of that's like rooted in trauma, not necessarily in truth, right? Like this woman is saying like, I know I'm fussing and I'm nagging and I may beat you. And at the very same time, she's saying, I don't want to really do that with you. So you got to be able to communicate and talk to me. And it is hard to be a child to like hear that message. Martha names, this reminds me of All About Love, Bell Hooks, All About Love, where she says abuse and love cannot coexist, particularly in that section of parenting, right, Martha? I think is what you're referencing.
Yeah.
Did folks read? Was anyone else in that?
Yes. I thought about that too, but I didn't want to say it because I don't know if all hitting is abuse.
Right. You have your own definition you're trying to explore. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But wow, that's a great connection to make. I mean, what do folks think? You don't have to say like, I do this or I do that. But there is a notion within Black culture and Black community, Caribbean culture, Caribbean community, and within some forms of Latinidad as well, that like discipline of the hand, right? And we know that, or like a child minds the hand, something like that. I'm saying it wrong in English because I heard it in Spanish, but it's something to that degree.
I think on page 62, the poem Dear Malik, she's really talking about, some of the struggles she had as a mother, and that she was a teen when she became a mother. I think the complications of learning how to be a mother as you're mothering. I mean, we get so many, positive instances of her supporting him, but she also recognizes those limitations as well, which I think is a really honest depiction of, you know, growing into being a mother in some way.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate that. I would ask if you're comfortable, would you be able to read it, particularly because we have group club members that don't have it. And, you know, again, leave it to me. You don't have to sound like me, but I would love to.
Yes, yes, please. Thank you.
Dear Malik, forgive the years when as a teen I became your mother. Forgive me when I disrespected you. Forgive me when I failed to listen. Forgive the years when you felt like an unloved teen, dull without your mother's shine. Forgive the wound that broke you from throat to fractured toe. Forgive me. Love, Mom. I almost feel like there's, you know, we were talking about expressiveness and acting out if you can't find the words. You know, I feel like this is finding the words later that maybe you didn't have in that earlier part of your life. And I think we've all kind of been in that situation, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert, for making that connection. You know, I'll share, because I guess I'm getting paid to. No, let me stop. I'll share that, this is recording. I'm sorry, Ron, you know I'm wild. I'll share that I actually just had this conversation with my mother this Mother's Day. Like it was literally it was very impactful and powerful, and it was very much the accountability of whatever it is I felt as a child that I didn't receive, right? And it was a genuine sense of these are the times and moments where I may have failed you. And we had that whole moment this year, and I was just, when I had to finish doing the reading yesterday, I was like, oh no, I thought I was over this, you know? So it really, to your point, everyone's been able to kind of look at their parents and maybe see shortcomings, and it takes a lot of grace, I think, as a parent to hear those things, be accountable to them, and try to figure out how to move in that, you know. And I'll name with you, because y'all are also family to me, that like that's something that I actually am going through literally on Sunday. And also because we're family and we're talking about mamas, part of my new swag, as Ron liked to point out in the beginning of the thing, is that I like left New York for a little bit, went to go visit my family in Florida, where my grandmother is buried. And tomorrow makes 10 years. And part of the conversation with my mother yesterday was naming that she actually never got to hear those things from my grandmother, right? And that's part of the reason why she wanted to tell me, like, I know that whatever misalignments we have as mother and daughter is, most of it is that because I haven't been able to connect those things with my own mother, and I don't, you know, you're only getting older and I don't want to be in that with you. And it was very impactful. So thank you, family, for holding that space. And I want to name that what Mama Phife is naming, sometimes when we go through mourning or trauma, or even having to be in the joy and in the depths of raising children, it feels like a solitary experience, right?
Was your mother supportive in the way that Malik's mom? Because I'm sure you wanted to be in the theater since you were 10 years old.
Yep, since I could open my mouth. Actually, you know, I wanted to be a poet first, believe it or not. Even though I was a personable child, I was very observant, and I wrote first. And my mother was very supportive of that and got me into writing really early. In New York City, had a young writers program. My mother also works for the Department of Education, so she's always had these resources. And by 7, she was able to support that dream. I was published in like a New York City young writers thing, you know, so she supported that. I do remember when it was time to do theater, you know, she thought I was good at it, but I also had gotten into many other schools, particularly in New York City. You know, my mother wanted me to go to Bronx Science or Stuyvesant. Like, it wasn't, if I didn't go into one of those schools, I would have gone to Catholic school. She didn't have any trust in the public school system at that time, and she was just like, no. And then I just kind of auditioned for LaGuardia without telling her. And you know, when I got in and I had gotten into the other schools, we did have tension, because she really did feel like even though I was talented, it wasn't secure. And as an educator, she wanted me in security. She was like, you're going to go to college. You're going to do all these other things. You're going to be an educator. You're going to be a teacher. So I sort of have had to lean her into it. But I can say fully at this age, my mother is like very supportive and confident sometimes too much, because I'm like, Mom, I don't, not too much, just the idea of maybe not feeling that always from her, and now having to embrace it as, you know, as the child, as the recipient of it. I don't always get it right, you know, like sometimes maybe I project something that's not support as something more of like, oh, she just doesn't get it. Especially in the Rona and these times, she was very much like, can you just get a job? Can you please just get a job? You know, I've been auditioning a lot, I've been doing a lot, and to her, she's very, very worried about the inconsistency, right? And she's like, what is it gonna look like by the end of 2022? What does it mean that you wanna be an actor? The movie theaters are closed. Like this has been her speech for a while. So thank you for asking that, because yeah, we're still trying to figure it out. But she knows I got the juice. You know what I mean? She's like, all right. I think she's just more, as many Caribbean, Black, and folks in Latinidad understand that, you know, what are the chances? I think we think about what are the chances and what does it look like to survive happily on something like that. And I think it's so interesting to me how Cheryl, it didn't seem like maybe those were issues. And like I think she believed 1,000% in the creativity, and it was going to take him there. I mean, I know with my family, they don't doubt my creativity. They doubt like the chances, you know, because they're all.
Did you end up going to college?
I went to college for 1 year, and so I was on a creative writing scholarship, and they took away the scholarship. So and I went to American University in DC. So actually, it was a private institution. I couldn't even afford to be there in the first place. So.
Okay. No, I was just asking because I went to the Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School of the Music and Arts when it was on the college campus.
But the college campus, because, you know,
when it was up on 135th Street and Compton Avenue. And the school, you know, the parents of the students in the school tended to be very supportive of their children's artistic music, the arts, the visual arts, the whatever, you know. But a lot of the students ended up going to some of the best colleges in the country because those schools, even though they were focused on the music and the art, you know, the arts, you still had to pull a full academic schedule. And it wasn't an academic schedule toward the general diploma that New York used to give. I don't know if they still give it. They used to give 2 different types of diplomas back then.
They still do.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
3 now.
So we still went, I mean, you know, I ended up going to Fordham. So, you know, so you still had that grounding because you still, even though you were following your artistic abilities, whatever they were,
right,
you still went to some of the most best colleges in the country.
Right.
So,
and I think that sort of culture was what I was getting from my mom. The idea that you can do this, but it's time for you to go and do something for real if you go to college.
Right.
And, the irony is that I didn't start working for the Department of Education until after I left college. I've never finished college. And my education career really took off after I left college, but that's a different day. That's for the E! True Hollywood Story. Let's move on. Are there any other sentiments that we feel Cheryl maybe is, wait, I want to say something. Martha just shared something. Well, she didn't just share it, but I'm going to read it aloud now because I just saw it. I think that might have been because Cheryl herself was a creative. Martha, I agree. You're naming that, like, you know, my mom is a beautiful soul and she's a DIY. She's a TikToker. She's all those things, but she's not necessarily like, I'm feeling feelings. Let me go write them down, or let me go watch this film, or let me listen to this song. She doesn't, not a TikToker, right?
Or let me pick up this paintbrush.
Or let me pick up this paintbrush, you know? She is not, you know, that's just not is her comfort zone. And I think we're naming that Cheryl is a comfort and creativity. Do we agree with that notion, Martha? You want to add to that?
No, I think that's what makes Cheryl such a unicorn, right? Because she's a Caribbean mom who herself is a creative. And so this is why she's pushing her son. Well, I feel like she's pushing him a little bit because she's like, look, you know, if you want to be a good writer, then you have to write every day. Like, let's get better at this, right? So I think that that's why she herself is such a unicorn, because she's a creative. Otherwise, I think she would have been more along the lines of like what what you shared with us in terms of you and your mother, where she is supportive, but she still has that instilled, like, but where's a job with the 401k?
Yeah.
Like, we still need that. Like, be a creator on your side, hustle, but I need for you to get that 401k.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm like, are you her? Like, no, stop. Does anyone have creative parents? Does anyone say, hey, my parents or my grandmama or someone?
Creative? I mean, my father was an artist. He could draw. They told me he was a draftsman in the Air Force, actually. So that's where I got my visual, because that's what I used to do, draw and paint and whatnot when I was a kid. So that was that. But Cheryl, what the uniqueness about Cheryl's, what she did with Malik is that when he came home and said that's what he wanted to do, that he was going to do that, he had already put the thing in motion. So she let him go to do what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
But she gave him the room. She gave him just as much room to succeed as she gave him to fail, and still be able to pivot and do something else if it didn't work out.
So maybe that's the question. Not necessarily are the parents, does anyone have creative parents? But if you want to share that, I'm still super curious. But maybe the question is, have we ever had that moment in parenting ourselves, or have we had parents or in connection to family who give enough room, right, to fail? Tell me, what did you say? It was beautiful. Repeat it. I'm messing it up.
You get as much room as you give to succeed, you give to fail. So that if it doesn't work, then they know that they can come back, and you can sit down and talk about it and figure out another way to go in life.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it was at the beginning, and it talked about the different relationships: the mother, son, artist to artist, teacher, and friend. So that goes along with what you're saying.
Absolutely, because that's the labels, we see that room, right? That you
Exactly.
go for. Yeah. Anyone else? Did anyone?
I think that's parenthood with or without creativity, though.
Yes.
Right? Like, just allowing your child to fail, but then embracing them with open arms, if they do or if they don't. I mean, my mom is on this platform, so she does that to me all the time, and I'm, a grown woman, but it's the ability to show your child it's okay to fail, but then it's okay to just move forward and, and start again, try again. And I think that's what she was doing. And she was kind of enforcing his positive aspects.
Absolutely.
You also learn from failure.
Say it again, Ron.
You also learn from failure. You almost have to fail in order to sort of grow, creatively. There's no way around that. So you have to try, and you hope and pray that you do have a support system, someone or people who will encourage you to continue to try.
So learning to fail, I'm just connecting the dots, looks like continuing, keeping on trying as well. And when I ask around parenthood, I want y'all to understand it's not just maybe who you've been able to be a parent to or you're parenting. In our relationships, parenting shows up. In our friendships, parenting shows up. In the way that we show up at work. If you're the person that, oh, EJ, you got the copies done? Oh, you sent the emails? Oh, you did that? You may be that person, right? So I'm thinking about parenting in all aspects. Those of us who are educators that hold space in this, right? I want you to think a little bit outside too of just parenting, just that responsibility that we have to each other. You know what I mean?
It's like mentorship.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people ask for my help in the literary, whatever I do in my life, I'm 90% sure, even if I don't say it out loud, that they're going to fail. But I'm going to try to support them to continue. I know You know, it took me a long time to get to this point with the book club, but I wasn't afraid to fail. So I always try to encourage anyone who I'm giving advice to keep going. You know, that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Is there a time where that gets hard? And I'm asking for folks who parent in all types of ways, whatever. Does that get hard to continue that encouragement of, because I don't necessarily have that responsibility. So the idea of continuing that encouragement, even though you're probably assured that it's not going to work for that person, does that get difficult? And I'm asking particularly if you're a mother as well.
Yeah, that does get difficult.
How do you sustain that? How do you sustain knowing the greater truth, but still having to support in certain ways?
You let them go ahead and try it.
Mm.
Life will teach it. Life will teach, you know, you can say, I'll give you an example. My daughter forever wanted to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But she just wasn't good at science and math.
Mm-hmm.
She was fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And the girl, you know, she went to a Lutheran school here down in the Bronx, because we originally lived in the Bronx. She went and got a 98 on the history regions for high school. You know, and her teacher wanted her to go to become a lawyer, but she wanted to be a doctor.
Right.
But all her friends that she was going with, they all wanted to be doctors. Well, actually, only one of them just recently, last year, became a doctor.
In the Rona, look at that.
Okay, but the other ones, they do different things. One is a social worker, one is a child psychologist type thing, you know, and my daughter, you know, she got married and she has 2 children and she, you know, she works and whatever, but only one of the 4 became a doctor, but they're all still good friends and everything, and everybody's happy, you know?
Yes.
But
yes.
I knew it was like, okay, but go ahead, try. You want to do this, go ahead, try it, you know?
Yes.
And she did find a college that allowed her to try it. And then she came to the realization, you know, I'm not really good at this.
Right. Well, I can imagine as hard as I'm speculating it is, I also imagine it must also feel really good once you see them find their place in that, whatever it may be, whether they succeed at, you know, if they like shock you and it's like, oh yes, you did this and I didn't know. Sort of the feelings I get from my mother now, like, oh, you're really doing this. And I'm like, yeah, you know, and
Right.
trying to feel that. Again, not something though that I like the unicorn that we're naming Cheryl is, I don't know if these are actual, it's so interesting to kind of see, like, I don't want to idealize or romanticize her parenting in a way, you know, and make it seem like none of us fit to that. Because I think what I'm naming is that our experiences are the ones that she's naming in the book. You know, I think we've all, to some extent, even if you haven't been mothered that way, can understand or relate to the idea of being as embracing as possible in order to let something grow, in order to let something be its best, you know. Because there are 6 minutes left, you know, time flies when you're chilling with P, okay? I love y'all so much. I'm so happy. I want Ron to be able to kind of name what's going on in the next couple of weeks. And I'm going to divert some of your attention. If you're able, go into the group chat and you'll be able to kind of download and see these links, including the film that we mentioned earlier in book club. Ron, take it away.
So tomorrow, our own Barbara Dubison starts her book club. She started her book club back in September, and now it's like the most important book club in all of New York City. So she's reading Passing. I'm also reading Passing, also to participate in the book club. So if anybody here has read Passing, it's an excellent book. They're reading pages, they're reading part 1, which I believe is chapters 1 through 4. So if you can join tomorrow, that's Barbara, I put that in the chat. Next week, we're going to discuss the second half of Mama Phife Represents. So pages 73 through 143, or chapters 3 and 4. That's what we're going to discuss next week. And then the following week on May 25th, Cheryl Boyce-Taylor will join the conversation.
Y'all need to smile a little bit to that.
So yeah, so that's
Okay.
what we're doing. And I
Some
do
joy.
encourage you to support. This is Barbara's last book, or Beyond Words book club final book of their season, which ends after this book. And like everyone else, we'll have the summer off, and we'll return in September. So yeah, so that's what we're doing coming up.